Okay, I think we're right now. People online are just going to have to find the new stream. So, just a quick recap. What I'm trying to show you in the presentation is a story about somebody who was into technology and loved technology, grew up in a science family, and was certainly somebody who had a bit of business sense, bit of ingenuity, and they were in the right place at the right time. So, where did the Medhurst family originally come from? It was Chobham, and to give you a bit of an idea, we're looking up in the top right hand corner at the southwest corner of London. We've got Heathrow in the middle top, we've got Windsor and Windsor Castle. Down here we've got Farnborough, which is where the air show is. So Chobham, I couldn't find much on what makes Chobham special, other than from about the 1960s, it's where the army tanks, the British tanks, came from. So that's about it. There is also, actually I'll just point out here, Aldershot here, and Aldershot features in a couple of slides' time. So I'll just point out that Aldershot's just a stone's throw from Chobham. So, Frederick was born in 1867. His father was a chemist, so he grew up in a family that was appreciative of science and chemistry in this particular case. He went to a couple of schools. He ended up from age 14 as a telegraphist at the Chobham Post Office. Chobham at the time was about 4,000 people, so it was a reasonable size centre. He ended up going to electrical engineering school at London Bridge. Now, this is a picture in the 1870s of London Bridge that I could find. This is looking at London Bridge from the Parliament side. So most pictures you see of London Bridge is of London Bridge in the front with Parliament and Big Ben. This is looking at it from Parliament and Big Ben in the other direction. Somewhere there is the electrical engineering school. And I couldn't find where it was at London Bridge. It was just electrical engineering at London Bridge. He did attend the Aldershot. This is the reference to Aldershot. Aldershot Military Academy. Now, Aldershot ended up becoming part of Sandhurst. It was the officer training school. After World War II, that occurred a little bit later, but it was a fairly well-known military training school. He ended up in the Royal Engineers, and he ended up as a signaller. Surprise, surprise. So he was obviously pretty good at telegraphy. So, and the other claim to fame with Aldershot was it ended up in World War I being the largest British army camp, where it actually housed 20% of the British Army at one stage in World War I. So it was pretty, it's military history. Now, he had a brush with telephony royalty. Alexander Graham Bell, who was a Scotsman, ended up in America and Canada. His claim to fame is he patented some of the first practical phones in 1876. He co-founded AT&T, and he spent a lot of time travelling around the world, not only espousing the new technology of telephony, but also recruiting people and engineers from around the world. Now, he actually ended up going to, and I can't find anywhere why he went to Chobham, but he ended up meeting Frederick. The family history says there was an instant affinity, and he continued to, Frederick continued to correspond with Alexander Graham Bell for the rest of his life. So, now, Alexander actually offered Pop a job in America. Now, bear in mind, he's in his teens. He's still in his teenage years. And his parents very firmly rejected the idea and didn't let him go. Just remember that. And he continued to correspond. This is quite a late picture of Bell. So, his heart was in Australia because a little while after that, a lady called Edith Emma Edney. Now, Edith comes across as a pretty fiercely independent lady. She travelled to Australia, to Melbourne with her father, and her father died on the voyage. And so Edith was the oldest in the family, and so on the voyage, basically Edith ended up as the head of the family. Now, these two obviously had met, I assume in Chobham or somewhere, London maybe, and they were obviously an item because Frederick in 1889 ends up coming all the way to Australia to join with Edith. Comes to Melbourne, gets a job as a telegraphist in Melbourne in the post office. 1891 they both moved down here, so this is the Tasmanian, the start of the Tasmanian connection. They're married in Holy Trinity Church, which is in Church Street in North Hobart, which is now the Greek Orthodox Church. They moved around a little bit. 165 Melville Street, which is still there. They then moved to somewhere in Parliament Street. They then moved to Ethelmont. Now, Ethelmont House still exists in Ethelmont Street in Lower Sandy Bay. And then they moved to Cranley, which is that became the family home. Now, Cranley still exists as well. It's one of those stately homes right down on the beach at Sandy Bay. 5 children appeared. And the interesting thing here that I'll just point out is Roland Harry Phillip, then there was Edith Jr., then there was Edney, who was the last boy. Edith Edney. It's actually her maiden name that was taken as the name of the last son. So, well, so yeah. Now, this is the dynasty, the Medhurst dynasty in around about the 1920s. We couldn't put an exact date, but given the ages, so we've got Harry and Kitty, and this is Wendell. Now, a lot of the information that I got, I sourced from this was from the family history, but also I work with a lady called Alison Medhurst, who is actually Wendell's daughter. So we've got Harry and Kitty, we've got Philip and Jessamine, who's holding Helen. We've got Roland, who's the oldest, and Dora, and Pop, who is here, who's holding Doug. Now, it's Doug's children who run Medhurst Equipment in Burnett Street in North Hobart. So Medhurst still exist. Apparently young Edith, never married. Don't know about Edney at all. Haven't got any information about Edney. But there's Pop. If it's the 1920s, then he's in his 30 to 40s. So 60, 40... No, he's in his 60s. He's in his 60s. So this is now, and it's circa 1920s. That was what the family said. We think this is around about the 1920s, but we're not quite sure. So now I've got a little firsts count that starts with this slide. There's quite a few firsts that Pop Medhurst does. This is the first one. He actually borrows £600, and we're talking about the early 1900s. He borrows £600, and in today's terms, that's about $30,000 to set up a machine shop. And he sets up this machine shop because he realises that the Post Department, the Post and Telegraph Department, is building the Hobart Telephone Exchange, and his company can supply a whole lot cheaper than what they can import from England, the equipment that's used in the exchange. So this is where the enterprising element comes in. He used to travel all over the place, and he used to travel either on a horse or on a bike, on a push bike. Absolutely loved penny farthings and had one, and used to compete on it. So he was a bit of a go-getter, and established the Medhurst Electrical Works and Telephone Company in about 1912, and I've got some pictures coming up. Now the thing I comment on here is, when the company was set up, none of the family were on the actual board. Now just remember that, because that was a big learning for Pop a little bit later. He devised a system that you were able to use both telegraphy and telephony on the same line, and the Post and Telegraph got him to install it throughout southern Tasmania. Also sent him to the east coast to install it, and also sent him to Queensland to install it in outback Queensland. So this is a first count, number one, because this was not implemented anywhere else in Australia that I could find.
Is this at the same time both signals have been transmitted?
No, I think they're individual. You switch from one to the other,
right.
But you could use the same lines by basically switching it. And his field telephone, he actually implemented it on his field telephone as well. So a bit of a timeline, and we've got another first in here. Okay, he was a telegraphist at 14. He moved to Melbourne when he was 22. Now he moved to the other side of the world when he was 22. He ended up in the Royal Engineers in the submarine mining. This was when he came to Melbourne. So he was in the Royal Engineers Signal Corps in England. He came to here. He was still took up with the Royal Engineers. Now that's a voluntary role. So he does that in his spare time. He transfers down here, gains a job, and he becomes a telegraphy operator and mechanist. So that means he puts all the bits together. He actually bolts all the bits together. The second first is he's issued a radio license, which is XFM. Now it's one of the first to be issued in Tasmania to an amateur. It's one of 3. What's the significance of that date? That's when Marconi demonstrated, that's the year Marconi demonstrated wireless. In 1895.
Atlantic or right.
Supposedly.
So,
the 3 dots.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
He demonstrated wireless a bit earlier.
A bit earlier than that, to the post office.
So the one across the Atlantic was 1901.
So this was the demonstration.
Yeah, that was the one
to the post office. Yeah.
Yeah.
So demonstrates experimental wireless, and I make the comment here. Marconi was a technology disruptor, and could see that he needed to challenge line telegraphy. He could do it wirelessly. He was also a hardcore businessman. Had an army of lawyers defending and prosecuting his patents. Now, at 32 years old, he becomes the officer in charge of signallers in Tasmania for the Defence Force. 32 years, that's pretty young. And he held that right through until the end of World War I. 1900, they're building the exchange. So he sees a bit of an business opportunity.
At Sandy Bay Road?
Sandy Bay Road. Actually in that building, in the building that's now Mantra. So where the exchange is, that was still the exchange, but it was in a much older building, which they demolished and built the new exchange. But it's still where it was originally built. Now, this is a very famous painting by Tom Roberts of the opening of Federal Parliament, the first Federal Parliament, in a building that we've featured a couple of times on the DATV nights. This is in the exhibition buildings in Melbourne, which still exist. There was he applied for the radio licence. He got it. The Duke and Duchess of York came all the way to Australia on their yacht, the Ophir. And the Duke and Duchess of York at that stage, they ended up becoming King George V and Queen Mary, which was the Queen Mother to Elizabeth and Margaret. So there's a connection there. But the key thing is the two Navy vessels that were accompanied the Royal Yacht Ophir were fitted with wireless. So Pop and a number of other people around Australia, it wasn't the first time it was a ship to shore, but because there was a contact made between an amateur and one of the Navy vessels up in Sydney, that's considered to be the first ship to shore. So this was the second. Now, at this point, Pop's been experimenting with wireless. He's built his own Spark set and his own crystal receiver. It was a real family affair. This is how it's written up in the family history. And I managed to find a contemporary advertisement about fuller block storage batteries, which the Medhurst company sold. This is not their advertising, but it just shows you the size of these batteries. These are not your put your device in your pocket batteries. These are luggables. But he employed the whole family. The only part of the family that was spared was young Edith. Doesn't get a mention of lugging some equipment down to Blinking Billy Point. But Roland and Harry carried the fuller block batteries, and he had two spark coils, which were 12 and 14 inch, and I'll go into them in a short while. Carried them to Blinking Billy Point, set up a 90-foot mast using scaffolding poles, lashed together with an end-fed antenna, and he got his son, Philip, who was 6 at the time, to row out and drop a counterpoise in the Derwent. So, real family affair. This is a picture from the family archives of, I think, the 14-inch. That looks to me to be not a 12-inch, but a 14-inch spark coil. It's also got the Siemens tape recorder, which is the reel at the back. There's a couple of keys in there and a couple of sounders and other bits and pieces. He used nickel and iron filing coherers, and I'll go into that in a sec, in a bit more. He set it all up down. If you've been to Blinking Billy Point, there is a bit of a fort which held the search lamp from the Alexander battery. And that particular fort, that's where it was all set up. And there's a bit of a plaque, which I'll show you in a minute, commemorating all of that. The interesting thing was, just around the corner, I didn't realise this until I looked at this on a map, is the Charles Darwin Cliff. So Charles Darwin, when he visited, back in the 1850s, I think it was, 30s, actually obviously went down to this point because there were some fossils in the cliff or whatever there was, and they ended up calling that the Charles Darwin Cliff. And I didn't actually know that until I looked at the map. Now, when I published this story in AR magazine last month, I had somebody contact me from VK3 from Victoria and claim that they have one of the spark coils that reputedly has come from the Medhursts. So I'm trying to get some pictures and a few other things and a bit of provenance because I'm not quite sure. And this is the only photo that we actually have of the equipment that I've been able to locate. So watch this space. Now, this is a picture of the St George in 1892. So there was the St George and the Juno. So this was one of the ships. The receivers were, he had two Coherer detectors of nickel and iron filings in glass tubes with silver contact electrodes. He had a sounder relay which operated a Siemens tape Morse recorder. The transmitters were 2 and 14-inch spark coils keyed with Morse keys. Now, in competition with Medhurst was the official station, which was set up by W.P. Hallam, who was the chief telegraphist for the post office. Now, Medhurst and Hallam, I think, had a good relationship. That's all I can read in the various newspaper articles that I can find. He set up a station at another fort further up the river, and Medhurst was at, Frederick was at the Blinking Billy Point. So he actually saw the ships first and contacted the ships first. The newspaper reports of the time, it's interesting, don't mention Pop Medhurst Station, but they mention Hallam's Station, and they actually call it makeshift. So I thought that was interesting, and they report that he made a contact with the ship, etc. So it's now I think there was a bit of probably some healthy competition in there. It talks about the ship coming around the iron pot and and Pop tapping out a message of welcome and very promptly getting a response. So that's what's in the family history. So so first number 3, ship to shore amateur spark contact. So this is an amateur spark contact, not an official contact, an amateur spark contact, ship to shore. And this is first number 3. Now I looked up some information about the coherers that were in use, and actually came across this particular diagram, which would be very similar to what is described in the family history, because you can see he's got an end fed, he's got a bit of tuning in here. The coherer, the iron filing and nickel coherer, which when there is a signal received here, and I have to say a pretty strong signal, it would make these iron filings cohere, so conduct, and there's a whole lot of theory about how that works and micro welding and all sorts of stuff, but it would make these conduct. That would complete the circuit here. This is the sounder. So this is effectively a little relay. It would close this circuit, which would record the dot or the dash here on the tape. So for the length of time that it's down, it would ink the tape or hold the tape, put a hole in the tape. It would complete this circuit up to this buzzer, which would tap the tube and make sure the iron filings were mixed up again. So that they could cohere again. And there's a comment made that every so often he had 2 of these, and the reason he had 2 of these was it got to a point where they didn't cohere and decohere anymore. So I assume they got too magnetised or whatever. But so the decoherer literally tapped the glass tube to mix up the iron and nickel filings again. So this would have been very similar to the setup that he would have had, as what's described in the family history. Now, down at Blinking Billy Point, there is actually a plaque on the navigation light, if you go down there and have a look, that commemorates both this event and also the reenactment which happened in 1985 between the HMS St George and the Long Beach Light Station, reenacted in 1985 using spark transmission apparatus. And the ACMA, the Spectrum Management Agency, it wasn't the ACMA at that stage, it would have been the SMA. The SMA gave special permission to use spark transmission in the reenactment, and they used a Marconi trench wireless set, which I thought was at the Devonport Maritime Museum, but when I was there a couple of months ago, I actually asked for them to search their records, and they have no record of it. So I'm not quite sure where it's ended up, because on the Marconi centenary that was held between Queenscliff and Devonport, that I went to, the centenary of that, it was on display in the Maritime Museum. It's no longer on display, so I don't know quite where that's ended up. But anyway, they got special permission to use spark. Spark is very wide, very broad signal. It transmits basically on all frequencies, or a large portion of them. So that's why they don't use that anymore. And there is a video that I'm trying to find of that particular event. Any questions at this point?
What's submarine mining?
Excellent question. Wouldn't have a clue. I assume it's laying underground cables. I'm not quite sure, but I'm blissfully unaware. I don't know. Submarine mining. But there was, the Royal Engineers had a submarine mining division.
The words suggest
wartime.
gaining minerals from the seafloor.
What about laying mines?
Or laying mines. It could be laying mines. Well and truly. Well and truly.
Russians coming. That's why the batteries were there.
That's why that's exactly why the batteries were there, actually. Okay. Now, first count number 4. In 1906, Frederick actually retires, and now he's chief mechanician of the Post and Telegraph Department, and he retires at 39. So he's obviously doing okay. He comes up with a design for a field telephone. Now, I've sort of said, oh, this is a bit like it's the iPhone of the era, because the field telephones of the time were large, heavy boxes that you needed 2 people to carry into the trench and connect up to the field telephone. Now, field telephones were, you would run 2 wires out for as long as you needed, along a trench or along a laneway or whatever, and you would connect up these field telephones, and they had batteries in them, and you could then talk on these field telephones. He came up with a much lighter, a system that had greater distance. So we're talking about, I think 180 miles, I think was what was quoted. And he put his innovation of being able to put telegraphy or telephony down the same line. Now, as it turns out, there's one of these in Tasmania that I was able to view. It's, as you can see, it's probably not quite the iPhone of the day, but iPhone of today, but it's pretty small. And we're physically talking about something that's a box that's about this cubed. Comes in a leather case, which I'll show you. In a next slide, 4 pounds or 1.8 kilos, and it had 150 mile range, and at the time that was huge. That was a lot more than what was available elsewhere. So he'd hit the mark there. You can see here there's a key, and then there's a switch, and I'll show you the switch in a minute. to speak, you had the switch in this way, or the signal to use the key as a telegraphy key, you'd signal. So little innovation there as well. Now he took it, they travelled in 1906 back to England. Both Frederick and Edith went back to England hoping to interest the War Office. We're talking about 1906, so it's a few years until World War One. But he obviously thought there was a bit of a need. He got a whole lot of worldwide patents. I think there was about 6 of them that he took out, worldwide patents. He got to England and he interested I'll go back a step here, he interested the International Electric Company in London to produce them, to manufacture them. So he got a manufacturer interested in them in Europe, that was really good. He ended up, the British Army weren't interested at all. This person from the colonies showing them up with his field telephone. But he interested a whole lot of other European countries. They all took orders. There was something like about 40 orders by the time he left to come back here, including South Africa, India, New Zealand and America. Were all interested, and he started the International Telecommunications Company, started manufacturing it and distributing it around the world. It came in a leather case. Now this is a little bit innovative. If I go back a step, you'll notice just here there's a couple of metal strips on the side. You can sort of see, there's the top of the metal strips here. And those metal strips, it slots into the leather case. This is sort of elephant hide leather case, so really thick leather. There's two connections, 2 strips in the actual case, and they come out to the terminals on the back. So when you slide it in, it makes contact. And I sort of thought, that's pretty innovative. Like, the fact is, in a trench, there's probably water, there's probably everything, and you'd end up corroding, looking like that. But at the time, pretty impressive. Now there's an interesting, amusing story about, in London, apparently Frederick took Edith to the Savoy Hotel for a big lunch or dinner or something like that, to enjoy an elegant English meal. However, Edith, after reading the menu, said, "I don't fancy any of those dishes. May I have a plate of nice thin bread and butter, please?" And that was reported in the family history, so I thought that was a funny story. Now, talked about them setting up the Medhurst Electrical Company. This was in 1912. This is 12 to 15 Argyle Street, and this photo was taken, this is actually the front of the family history. There's features on the front of the family history. And this was taken in about 1919. They're next to the Undertakers in Argyle Street. And so I thought, I'm going to find out where this was. So I went to find 12 to 15 Argyle Street. This is today. So there's the hotel on the corner, Hadley's. This is 25. This is a big building at 25, which is Breast Green, Tasmania, and a few other. This is Health. There is a car park just here. This is number 9, Argyle Street. So somewhere in that gap, it was 12 to 15 Argyle Street. So that's it today in 2024. Now, number 5. The Medhurst Company put in and installed the first electric lighting in Hobart. So another first. Now, 1912, you're starting to see the Duckreach Power Station go in. You're starting to see Wadamana go in, 1922. A little bit later, Now there's some interesting stories about duck reach, because there was a whole lot of legislation put in that had things like there was a 20 kilometre, or it would have been in miles at that stage, but there was a 20 kilometre boundary put around Launceston where no other company was allowed to supply electricity to Launceston because they needed to recoup the cost of putting in the Duck Reach Power Station. So there's some interesting stories there. But anyway, they were very involved. Those schemes were being put in, which meant electricity was starting to flow into the towns and the cities. They did a whole lot of work at the zinc works, installing equipment, and the carbide factory at Electrona. It's the reason Electrona is called Electrona. There used to be a carbide factory there. Carbide, many uses, but one of the uses was acetylene. Drop water on carbide, you get acetylene. So acetylene lamps, etc. And that was an electric process that they actually used, very similar to the electrolytic zinc works, the zinc works.
Don't forget the Union Carbide Company making batteries.
Spot on, spot on. Another use for carbide. So it's good. Now, reputedly, and Sean, if you're listening out in the other room, reputedly at the Bush Inn at New Norfolk, they have a switchboard that still has a Medhurst label on it. Now, I should drop into the Bush Inn and ask them whether I can look at their switchboard, which might get me a firm response. But anyway, but yeah, apparently there is. They installed, one of the first places in New Norfolk that they installed electric light was the Bush Inn, and they installed the switchboards, and there is a label in there on Medhurst Electric Company.
They've got a hallway with some historical artefacts, so you might be in luck.
There you go.
And up at the Watermata Power Station, there's quite a fair bit of history and article.
There's a museum.
Yeah.
Correct. So, now I'll just go back a step here. Up till about 1920, the company was doing pretty well, and they reported it was doing pretty well. £2,411, and the first dividend of 10% was paid to shareholders. So they're doing okay. A few years later, not doing quite so well. Company fortunes took a dive, and by November 23, company was put into liquidation. And minutes, the interesting thing about the minutes, they make a comment in the family history that the minutes showed that they had plenty of orders, lots of stock, outlays, maybe. They blame award changes, so industrial relations again, that contributed to the demise. And around about November, December 1923, Frederick and the family members, who were only employees of the company, they were not running the company, they were the namesake of the company but not running the company, were told they were no longer required. They tried to trade out and shut the whole thing down in December 23. So that would have been a really difficult time for the Medhurst family. They were only employees, and I think that probably stuck with Pop for the rest of his life. They restarted, the company then regrouped, and so this shows a little bit of a great bit of resilience here. The company regrouped. They actually started Medhurst and Sons Proprietary Limited, so it's a different company. And they ended up selling domestic products, so domestic electrical products, so like Falco irons, Hoover vacuum cleaners and universal kettles at 95 Collins Street. So just a bit of a recap. So this is Pop from 34 to 61. Lots of firsts in here. Creates the field telephone, retires, installs. We've got World War I in the middle here. 1923, WIA Tasmanian Division is created. In the same year, the end, he's sacked at age 56. Now, 1925, he was made a life member. And if you look at the honour roll up the back at some point, he's the very first life member of the WIA Tasmanian Division. 1925, remember the date, because there's an interesting juxtaposition here. 1928, he's reported as the first president of the Hobart Radio and Research Club, not the WIA. Now just be a little bit careful with this, because it's over 100 years old. This is a QSL card from the Hobart Radio and Research Club.
Oh, wow.
So this is interesting. As we've reported in our centenary, the start of the WIA Tasmanian Division was pretty rocky. There were lots of fights at meetings and all sorts of stuff, and I have a feeling that Pop didn't want anything to do with them at that early stage when it was started. He ended up starting his own club. So it's
life member of the other.
Being a life member. So there was obviously something there. He was contributing, and the WIA could see that he was contributing to give him a life membership. You don't give life memberships out every day. So there's a little bit of interesting, and we'll never know. Now, this is fascinating. This is about the rebuilding of the Medhurst brand, if you like. Now, this is a 1957 March edition of the Tasmanian Electrical and Radio Traders Group. Now, how many electrical and radio traders do you think there were in Tasmania? There were obviously quite a few. So, but April is National Washing Machine Month, and every woman deserves a washing machine.
You'd get slapped for that today.
I'm very glad that we've moved on, but I just thought I'd put that in there. The reason this is a significant addition is it has a interview with Harry Medhurst, and there's a whole lot of the family history that came out in this particular article. In 1925, they started a branch in Launceston and ended up selling, by 1955, they were turning over £1 million in electrical goods in both Hobart and Launceston. Not insignificant amount of sales. So, well and truly rebuilt. Well and truly. 1957 in Collins Street. Now this building still exists. I'll show you a photo of it. This is not 95. This is actually a little bit further up. Just a little bit further up. 95 is actually the Fitzgerald's department store. That's 95 Collins Street. Now Fitzgerald obviously came in a little bit later than that, but that's Medhurst's, and you can see they sell Hoover and Cedar and Heckler jugs, the jug elements that used to rewind when they blew. Never put your finger in the water because the water's live.
You couldn't lift the lid.
Correct. The Bakelite lid. Okay, another first. Frederick's made a life member, and there is just I have to say there's the difference between the 1925 and 1928. He was obviously considered to be a contributor, but at some point he went, I'm going to start my own club, etc. He was patron of the Wireless Institute from about October 1945, after the reactivation. So after World War II, when everybody got their radios back from the post office. Now the interesting thing here is there were 2 patrons appointed after the war. one for the north and one for the south. And I think this signalled for me, because there's a comment in his obituary that he didn't like discord, and he was a peacemaker. And so I think this might have been a bit of a mechanism to appease both the north and the south and try and lessen the discord. Frederick was president of the WIA in 1929, 1930, 34, 37 and 38, just before the radio shut down for World War II. And yeah, the first life member. So that's number 6. Now, just a bit of an aside here. I'm going to hand around this letter, so you don't have to try and read it up on the screen. But this is a letter to Frederick, dated the 24th of August 1926, from Sir Alan Cobham. Now, flying cross and a few other interesting medals. So he's obviously he was a flyer in World War One. He made, and this to me says that Frederick was made a real impression, and I've got a couple of other quotes a little bit later around this. Whenever he met somebody, he made a real impression. Alan Cobham was flying around Australia promoting aviation as the next biggest thing. And just have a look at the PS on this, because the PS says, "Please remember that flying is a national necessity and an urgent need for the future development of Australia."
Bonza.
Now, Cobham was also a test pilot for de Havilland, the de Havilland Airplane Hire Service, and de Havilland was a very well known company in aviation, early aviation circles. Pop was really well travelled, because there's lots of pictures of him all over Tasmania. This is the Launceston Radio and Electrical Exhibition in 1926, and there's Pop sitting centre. So here he is here, and he's gone from XFM. He then went to A7AH, was his call sign, and then after 1925, when there was the Paris Agreement, so the radio conference in Paris that came up with the call sign arrangement, which country got which call sign, he got VK7AH. Here he is as the president of the Hobart Radio and Research Club in 1927. Here he is here with his eyes closed. This is TW, this is Watkins, no, DX, he was DX to start off with. And I've got a quote from him in a short while, funny quote. And that's the QSL card that was going around. And I just make a comment. I just get the impression he was just not impressed with the shenanigans that were going on in the WIA. That was, and if his comments about him not liking Discord, that would really grind with him.
He probably wouldn't like our club since we use Discord.
I know, no, well, yes. Probably an unfortunate name for it, but anyway. Now, the last first. This is number 8. In 1928, he was able to get the first Tasmanian Federal Conference. So this is the WIA Federal Conference that was going around Australia. 1928, it was a week-long affair. People took a long while to get here. It was a whole week of activities, including the AGM and all of that sort of stuff. It's happening in Bundaberg this weekend, and it's only a weekend. So, and it's Frederick on the very end, looking very well dressed. Now, at this stage,
Southern Cross looks a bit wonky there.
and I'll just point out here, most of these pictures just say stenographer. I've actually named her up as Ms. E. Clark because there was a photo I came across that actually had her named up. So that was all of the councillors, including here's Trevor Watkins, VK7DX in the back row. There was Len Crooks. Now Len, it's Len there? The Northern Patron. So, and some of the others. It's VK3, VK5, VK7, and that's so interesting. But anyway, that's the last of the firsts. Here's Fred, and I have to thank Linda for locating this picture and a number of the other pictures. This is Fred at one of the field days. So, and the key thing here is he's very informally dressed, not in the WIA blazer, which I'll go to. So we go to 1932 field day. Here he is in the WIA blazer, along with a number of others in the WIA blazer. Very dapper. 1932 field day. Now 1932, 33, 34, he was still patron. He was also the Tasmanian Division Councillor who went to the federal conferences. And in the menus that for each of the annual dinners, he was the PMG toast proposer. So he proposed the toast for the PMG, which then responded. So there was someone from the PMG there. So, you know, relationships with the regulator happening back in those days. Now, this is a fascinating photo. This is the 1935 Federal Conference. And you'll notice this is the building in 1950 that they moved into. Still there. This is 95 Collins Street. So this is the Fitzgerald's building. Or what ended up becoming the Fitzgerald building. It's not the Fitzgerald's building at this point. And the interesting thing is there was some swapping and changing here as well, if you look at the photos. This is 1954 when the Queen Elizabeth II visits Tasmania. This is the Fitzgerald's building now. And you'll notice Medhurst's. And they've got the Union Jack flying. So they've actually moved into this building, which is 2 along. Now, this particular photo, if you go into the Fitzgerald building now, into the offices which are at the top of the Fitzgerald's building, there is a lift foyer. This photo is at the end of the lift foyer on the wall. So I snuck in there and took a photo. Now, this is it today. This is the building that they used to be in because it's got the same facade. It's just been tidied up a bit. This is the Fitzgerald building. So this is 95 Collins Street. And this bit in the middle that used to house 2 buildings has all been redone. So if we go back, and Fitzgerald's, the name Fitzgerald's Department Store is still there, it's just been painted over. So there you go, in 2024. Now, 1938. Now can I just say, this is Pop in his blazer with a fez on. Looking very dapper at 71. So he's still going to field days at 71. Absolutely love it. So, cap off. And only a few more slides, so we'll finish up. 66 to 81 years old. So, there's a wonderful... In 1928, there was a comment in one of the articles in 1928. The QSL card suggestion by Waddy Watkins, VK7DX, was the land of ABC. Apples, beer and crystals. that was made. He was, I've mentioned this, and PMG toast proposer. Field day photo, he was 65, and then that last field day he was 71. In the 1933 annual WIA Tas Division official dinner, there's a little comment in the menu at the end. YL scooters, perambulators and bath chairs at 10:30 p.m. in charge of Pop. Order early. So there's little mentions of Pop all over the place. We then go into World War II. Of course, everything ceases during World War II. There's lots of comments in the VK7 column in AR magazine, which is the Pop attendance report, whether he attends the divisional meetings or not. So obviously really well regarded. In 1928, in Ham Notes, which was in the radio magazine of August the 15th, 1928, I quote, "Our dear old father of radio in Tasmania, 7AH, FW Medhurst, has the entertainment arrangements well in hand." So this is about the federal conference. "And Pop knows how to look after visitors. By the way, Pop has a room of real wireless junk at his home. So I think AH better keep that room locked during the convention." Now, what do we learn from Pop's obituary? So, 3rd of August. He dies after a week-long illness, aged 81. What do we learn from his obituary? You always learn something from people's obituaries that you don't know. He was Patron, very fondly referred to in divisional meetings. The Pop attendance report always included whether he came along to the meeting or not. It makes a comment that he was a peacemaker, really didn't like discord, had a calming influence over that early parochial rumblings, and there were the two patrons. So I don't know whether that was his suggestion or not, don't know. He's seen all over the place. So he's seen in Launceston, he's seen in Burnie, he's seen in Hobart. He's always out at field days and always helping. So real peacemaker. And there was a divisional meeting held on the day he died, that night. And they make the comment that there was a 2-minute standing silence held. So held in really high regard. And that's a picture that accompanied his obituary in AR magazine. Sorry, the quality's not good, but it was basically newsprint back in those days. Now, at the time of his death, it was recorded that Frederick had a lyre-shaped Edison talking machine. This is the junk they talk about in that earlier quote. With electrically powered cylinder changes. He owned breathtaking vintage radio gear and a penny farthing bicycle, the main wheel of which was used in the last of his inventions, which was a wind generator and 6-volt battery lighting system at the holiday house he owned at Oyster Cove that he affectionately called Fort Chimo. So, and I did ask Alison whether there is any of that equipment still floating around in the family, and there isn't. It's all gone. So, lots of firsts all the way through. XFM, inventor, first contact, first light, first life member, first president, and first federal convention. So lots and lots of firsts. And that's what jumped out at me when I did the presentation. I sort of went through and I went, hang on, there's actually quite a lot in here. Now, Medhurst Company still exists. that photo that I showed you of the clan, the boy that is sitting on Pop's lap is Doug Medhurst, and it's Doug's family that runs Medhurst Equipment. And you'll notice it says established 1912. So there you go. The eldest. Sorry? Doug used to run it well and truly. And Doug's still around. Doug's still alive. And it's Doug was the oldest offspring of Dora and Roland, and Roland's the oldest in the Medhurst clan. So yeah, still run. So what do I conclude out of this? He was very much a man of his time. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. Spent lots of money. Put lots of money into business ideas. Was bitten by it and learnt. He was an opportunist. I cite the whole thing of he put up an offer to manufacture the equipment cheaper than they could get it from England. Bit of an opportunist there. You know, they could have just shipped it all in from England and paid a lot of money. Technology was exploding at the time. So yeah, he was able to see that opportunity. He was able to harness it, assist the government, the military, and his own interests, and build a fairly profitable business that's still going. It's still going in a different form, and in fact, it just highlights the Medhurst family has this wonderful way of working out where the market's going and being able to corner it or whatever. So yeah. Now, Alexander Graham Bell. We can only imagine what Pop could have influenced if he had taken the offer to go to America with Graham Bell, Alexander Graham Bell, and actually work at AT&T. Who knows what would have happened? So yeah, and how that technology could have benefited from that. And I really do think we need to reintroduce the WIA Blazers.
Yeah, right.
Or name a field day after him.
Yeah, too right.
Blazers on.
And it's interesting that those years 30, 32, 33 were the worst years of the Depression.
Well and truly.
That was when the employment rates really rose and people were starving on the streets.
Yep.
That was
Soup kitchens.
to be able to indicate he really was fairly financially affluent.
Well and truly.
Just a couple of asides. My grandfather on my mother's side was one of the carpenters who built the Watermana pipelines in timber.
Okay.
They, when they went in, there were no roads. They went in on a little wooden railway.
Yep.
And it was himself, my grandma, and my mum, but they had two other daughters while they were up there.
Okay.
Now, from
Didn't have much to do at night.
we jump down to about 1940, thereabouts.
Okay.
My dad had been a Rawleys representative up in Cressy and Longford and Deloraine, and in fact they lived at the upstairs at the shop on the Y in Deloraine.
Okay.
There's now a cafe. It was a butcher shop. But one of the stories up there was that the selling of fuel for motor vehicles wasn't regulated time-wise.
Okay.
If you wanted fuel after hours and you could get it, you could do it.
Okay.
So he often got knocked up at night after closing time to go across the road to the stone barn that's there now that sells farm supplies and pump petrol for them.
Yep.
So that was that.
I love
But while he was doing all that, he learnt to service radios, receivers
it. Okay.
by correspondence. all the notes that he was sent.
Okay.
So that was that, but he moved down to Hobart in the mid-40s or somewhere there, and actually had a workshop in one of those premises in Collins Street.
Okay. Okay.
But then he moved down to Margate.
Yep.
And he was an agent for Medhurst Electrical. And our little Ford Ute had a picture of a washing machine and
Yep.
a Hoover vacuum cleaner.
I love it.
And we had a Hoover vacuum cleaner and a Hoover washing machine.
Purchased from Medhurst.
Yeah. But he used to buy his components from Medhurst.
Yep.
Medhurst's in between what we saw and up in Brisbane Street, I think it is.
Yep.
Actually had quite a large establishment further up Collins Street.
Showroom.
Where,
Yeah. Yep.
Risby's.
Yep.
Or next to where Risby put in.
Yep.
And that was then taken over for other things.
Okay.
I can remember going with
Cool.
him to the counter there.
Yep.
And buying the components that they were.
Yep.
They had a lot. They didn't have everything.
Yep.
And
There were,
Genders had the other line, and then Home Crafts.
fantastic.
Yeah.
There was one thing I forgot to mention. When they moved into 95 Collins Street, up on the top floor of 95 Collins Street, they make a comment that Pop had a shack, a radio shack, up on that top floor. But he also had there what they called the influencer. And the influencer was a Wimshurst machine with some Leyden jars that he could influence decisions. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting comment in the family history. But anyway, so thank you. Lots of acknowledgements, and thank you to everyone who helped put this together. Rosemary Travers, this is a Hobart story. Rosemary Travers actually comes from a family that is linked to the Johns family. It's Andrew Johns' family. So there's a linkage into the Medhurst family because Rosemary was a Medhurst. So there is some Medhurst connection into the Johns family as well for 7AJ, for those who don't know Andrew. But so there's some linkage in there as well. So anyway, any questions? Any
What's a preambulator?
preambulator?
Was on one of
You
the
preambulate.
Pram.
Yeah, it's a pram.
Right.
That's where a pram comes from. Or something that you carry something on. Could be a baby, could be whatever. Yeah. You perambulate. In fact, I think in the criminal code it says to perambulate in relation to jaywalking, I think, or something like that. Anyway, there's something. Anyway. Anyway.
One comment I noticed you were talking about the ship-to-shore contact. You had a WP
Hallam.
Was that the Wally Hallam?
Yes.
And went to Antarctica?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so. There's certainly a connection there. I think he came back. No, it was
It was before.
No, it was before.
Before, because that was 1911.
Correct. Yeah, because he went down.
Left Hobart just before Christmas.
Correct.
1911.
Correct.
Yeah.
He was the chief telegraphist at the post office.
Yeah, that's what suddenly made me think. I thought he was. Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah,
Nice picture of him by the gear in the Launceston House.
there you go. I love it.
If my memory serves me correctly, if you go to Davey Street near the law courts, the federal law court there, and look up to the right, you might see a FW Medhurst electrical sign still there. They must have had a warehouse or a workshop or a garage or something in there.
At the right or left?
On the right, opposite the park.
Okay, I'll go and have a look.
Is that in where the Royal Tennis is?
About that, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So towards Harrington Street.
Yeah, just a, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. No, I'll go and have a look. Well and truly.
Can you see
Thank you.
driving or do you have to walk?
Oh no, well there's a laneway
You
there
might see
that
it
goes
down
through
the
to 137 Macquarie. There's a laneway at the back. It's a shortcut that I take quite often. Yeah. Takes you to the lands building around the back of the family law courts. Lots of those little laneways in Hobart, if you know about them.
Some of them don't go anywhere.
Oh, correct. Anyway, thank you very much. Cheers. I hope you've learned something.